My mum screamed, "Moving out doesn't mean you can evade responsibility." I told her, "I'm not your free babysitter." Then she left the kids at my doorstep. Anyway, that night the police stopped by her house. I'm a 22-year-old and I left my parents' home when I turned 20 because living there was unbearable. They constantly favored my younger siblings, used me as unpaid help, and acted like everything I had was theirs too. When I moved out, my father told me not to let the door hit me on the way out and to stay gone. I rented the smallest and most affordable apartment I could find and have maintained the same full-time for nearly 4 years. My parents didn't even make it a month before they started calling me, begging me to return because someone else had to take care of my siblings. I declined, relishing my newfound freedom. My father eventually demanded that I move back and pay them rent, insisting that family should come before personal freedom. I retorted that my life mattered too, and for once I was living for myself. He responded with, "Let's see how long you last without us." And we didn't speak for months. I have no idea what he expected, but I managed just fine on my own. Over time, my family seemed to accept that I wasn't coming back on my knees, and we slowly started to mend our relationship. It was obvious they struggled with the fact that things were on my terms now, not theirs. They occasionally begged me to look after my younger siblings, despite the two closest to my age being in their late teens. My parents didn't want to burden them with babysitting, which was hypocritical since they had always dumped it on me. When I pointed this out, they gaslighted me and then went silent for months, yet again. They were the ones who eventually came back to ask for my help. Recently, I bought a used gaming console, though I could only afford one game which was bundled with it. One Saturday, my mum showed up and asked me to watch my two youngest siblings for a while. She basically shoved them inside and left, leaving me with them all day in my small apartment. My mom didn't return until after 10 p.m., only because I called and demanded she come get the kids. She wasn't happy that I cut her fun short. I told her that unless she paid me, I wouldn't watch my siblings all day anymore, and that next time I wouldn't even open the door and would call the police if she left them outside. The next morning I noticed my gaming console was missing, so I called my parents, as I suspected one of my siblings had taken it. I said I was coming over to get it immediately, but my mom said it could wait because my youngest sibling was playing on it, and she didn't have the heart to take it away. I insisted it was taken without my permission, and that I was coming to get it. I rode my bike to their house as quickly as I could. When I arrived, my sibling was crying because the console's battery had died, and they didn't have the charger. I demanded it back, but my dad took it and said I could have it back when I agreed to help out with my siblings more. I told him that if he wanted to play that game, I'd involve the police, and I wasn't bluffing. He stood his ground until I started dialing on my phone. My mom yelled, "Wait," and quickly took the console back from my dad. He called her a traitor and demanded she return it to him instead of me, but she said it wasn't worth having the police called on them. Before leaving, I told them that if this happened again, I wouldn't hesitate to call the authorities. If anything like this ever happened again, I'd be calling the police first, and if they wanted a gaming console for my siblings so badly, they could buy their own. My dad yelled that I couldn't disrespect him like that. I countered by saying that even though I'm an adult, he's never bothered to show an ounce of respect to me, and I'd had enough. Then I walked out with him yelling at me to come back and face him. Right now, it's back to silence from them. My mum texted me once, begging me to still watch my siblings. I said that if she wanted me to babysit so badly, she could pay me, and I'd only take the money in advance because I wasn't doing it for free anymore, especially after they stole from me and tried to keep me from getting my property back. They don't own me. I'm an adult with my own place and my own life, and they can either get used to it or get lost. It's been over a week since that text conversation, and none of them have talked to me again, which is fine. They can deal with their own messes. Update. Wow, I can't believe I forgot about this account for nearly a year, but I was watching Reddit videos online and randomly saw my original post, and I realized I had totally forgotten to make an update. So I've come back to give one. There will be police involvement and some mild brawling towards the end. I don't know if that qualifies as a trigger warning, but I just figured I'd mention it. As some know, I previously posted about my parents refusing to give back my Nintendo Switch when one of my siblings stole it, and many commenters had a lot to say about the nonsense my parents were doing and suggested calling the police or CPS if my parents ever dumped my younger siblings off at my door without asking again. Well, I kept waiting and waiting, But after the last time my mum called me and I refused to babysit my siblings without getting paid, I did not hear from either of my parents for about 3 months. Then one day it finally happened. Out of nowhere, my parents called and asked if I could babysit, acting like the whole situation with my Nintendo Switch had never happened. I told them I was not going to babysit unless they paid me, and it also had to be on one of my days off. My work schedule had changed since then, so I no longer had Saturdays off. I had actually asked my boss to schedule me on Saturdays, because that was the day they usually wanted me to babysit the most. Besides, working an extra shift was better for me financially. My dad got angry like he always did, and said I needed to grow up and help the family. I told him he needed to stop acting like he still had any control over me, and that I was doing exactly what he always claimed he had done at my age by taking responsibility for my own life. At the same time, he had always worked on Saturdays and pushed a lot of his own responsibilities onto me. So as far as I was concerned, he had no right to lecture me. He immediately started yelling into the phone, and before long my mum took it away from him. I told her I could only babysit on Sundays because that was my only day off, and I would only do it if they paid me $40 and provided pre-packaged lunches, dinners, and snacks for my siblings. I was not about to spend my own money feeding their kids. That was not my responsibility. I also warned them that if anything of mine disappeared again, like what happened with my Nintendo Switch, I would call the police to get it back. I still had the receipt from when I bought it, and I had written down the serial number, so proving it belonged to me would not be difficult. As soon as my mum heard that, she lost her temper and started swearing at me non-stop. I let her keep going while I mostly ignored the phone until she realized I was not responding anymore and demanded that I say something. I simply repeated my conditions. Sundays only, $40, and pre-packaged food. Otherwise, they could forget about me babysitting. There was a long moment of silence on the other end of the call. Then my mom exploded again. She said my younger siblings, who were 13 and 16, had been forced to help around the house because I was not there anymore and she and my dad needed a break. I laughed and said, "Oh, really? Like all the breaks you ever gave me?" Which was none. She immediately argued that it was different because I was the oldest child. I told her it was not different at all. They had turned me into another parent, and because of that I had missed out on a big part of my childhood. Now I had my own life, and it was completely hypocritical for them to expect me to step back into that role after I had already moved out. They still had 2 teenagers living at home who were old enough to do everything they had expected from me. My mom immediately switched into playing the victim and complained that my younger siblings had become rebellious and refused to listen to either of them. I told her their problems were no longer my responsibility. They needed to find someone else to watch the kids because I was busy living my own life. My dad grabbed the phone again and started yelling even more. I just laughed and told him he was making a lot of noise without actually saying anything. My mom took the phone back one more time and tried pleading with me again. I repeated my conditions: Sundays only, $50, and pre-packaged food. I also reminded them that if they threatened me or stole anything from me again, I would not hesitate to involve the police. I could hear both of them start arguing loudly with each other about what they should do. I finally told them they could figure it out themselves and call me back later. Then I hung up. After that, everything went quiet again for a while. A few weeks later, on a Saturday morning, I was getting ready to leave for work when someone suddenly started pounding on my apartment door. It was loud, fast, and sounded like someone was hitting it with both hands. I recognized the knock immediately because that had always been my mom's way of knocking, and she knew I would recognize it. Right after the knocking stopped, I heard someone running down the hallway. I stayed by the door and listened. Then I heard my 2 youngest siblings arguing with each other while they lightly knocked on my door. It became obvious that my mom had left them outside my apartment and run off. Luckily, because of all the warnings people had given me before, I already had a simple plan if she ever tried something like this. Instead of opening the door, I opened my window, pulled out the screen, climbed outside, and walked away. My apartment was on the ground floor, so getting out through the window was easy. After that, I called one of my neighbors who lived a few doors away. She was a kind older woman who loved kids, and she already knew about the problems I had with my narcissistic parents. After I explained what had happened, she called the police and reported that 2 children had been abandoned in the hallway after their mother pounded on someone's apartment door and ran away. Needless to say, the police showed up and picked up my younger siblings. Later that day, my parents called me absolutely furious. I acted like I had no idea what they were talking about and asked why they were so angry. My mum admitted that she had left my two youngest siblings outside my apartment for me to babysit before running off. I asked her if she seriously left them there without anyone even answering the door, because I had already told her several times that I worked on Saturdays and would not be home. My mom went completely quiet for a few seconds before yelling, "How was I supposed to know that?" I told her it was entirely her own fault because she abandoned her kids outside my apartment, hoping I would be home on a day that I had repeatedly told her I was working. She was trying to back me into a corner and make me miss work by leaving me with no choice except to babysit. She tried making excuse after excuse, but I told her there was no excuse for what she did. It was irresponsible, immature, and completely unacceptable. Eventually, she started crying, and I let her cry for a little while before asking if she was finished. That only made her angry again, and she went right back to yelling. She screamed that the police were charging her with child abandonment. I told her that was not my fault because she was the one who left the kids sitting in the hallway. I also told her that even if I had been home, I would have called the police myself if she refused to come back and get them. I had already warned them that I worked Saturdays now, and I was done letting them trap me into babysitting. The rest of the conversation turned into more pointless arguing from her side, and nothing came of it. Somehow my mum managed to get away with nothing more than a fine and a warning because she convinced the police that she honestly believed I was home. At least, that was what my next oldest sibling told me in a text message. I never found out how much the fine was, but I figured having to pay it might make her think twice before dumping the kids at my apartment again. My dad was never charged because he was at work and claimed he had no idea my mum planned to leave my siblings at my door. I was told he was actually angry with her for doing it. The irony of that had me laughing harder than it probably should have. But I have to admit that, as far as I know, he had never pulled a stunt like that himself. Still, my mum ended up with a police record. As far as the law was concerned, that was her first strike. Things really came to a head on Thanksgiving. My parents invited me over for dinner, and I had a feeling it was going to be some kind of setup. I was right. During dinner, my dad sat there smoking a cigarette and acting like he was still the boss of everyone. He had my mom sit me down before announcing that enough was enough, and he was putting an end to what he called this whole farce. He told me I needed to move back into their house, start paying rent to help cover the mortgage and household bills, and go back to helping raise my younger siblings because they never had any time to themselves anymore. He also complained that the fine my mom had to pay had hurt them financially. I looked at him and simply said, "No." That was my answer, and I refused to change it no matter how many times he barked orders at me. He became so angry that he suddenly came after me. My dad is not a small man, but neither am I anymore. I had been going to the gym for months, and I had even learned some basic fighting skills. I also happened to be wearing my steel-toed boots. When he charged at me, I kicked him hard in the groin, then followed it with a punch to the face that knocked him straight to the floor. He hit the ground hard and immediately curled up, clutching himself while throwing up from the pain. Then I calmly told both of my parents that my phone had been recording everything from inside my pocket the entire time, so I could easily prove that he attacked me first. My dad shouted for me to get out of his house and never come back. I was perfectly happy to do that, although before I left I grabbed a turkey leg from the serving platter and took it home with me for dinner. After that day, the only people who stayed in contact with me were my siblings. They called and texted me, saying I had walked out like a boss. Apparently there were also ongoing jokes around the house about Dad getting kicked in the groin. I ended up spending Christmas with one of my friends' families instead, and they even invited me back for future holidays. Then another bombshell came out. My mom had been pregnant, and somehow my parents decided that losing the baby was my fault. I finally understood why they had been so desperate to make me move back home on Thanksgiving. My mom had been pregnant with their 6th child, and I had no idea until recently. Not long after my previous post, one of my siblings found my Reddit account and showed it to the rest of the family. My parents ended up reading everything. Soon afterward, they came to my apartment, pounding on my door and screaming that I had set them up, gotten my mom arrested, and made everyone think they were terrible parents. I stood in my doorway and called them out on everything they had done over the years, including abandoning my younger siblings outside my apartment on a day they knew I was working. No matter how anyone looked at it, that was terrible parenting. I told them it did not matter whether they thought I had set them up because I would have called the police on my mom anyway after she abandoned the kids at my door. The outcome would have been exactly the same. My dad looked like he was about to punch me again, so I told him that just raising his fist proved my point that they were awful parents. Then I told him that if he actually tried to hit me, it would probably end the same way it did last time, and I did not think his groin could survive another kick from my steel-toed boots. As luck would have it, I was wearing those same boots again. The second I said that, Dad visibly winced and instinctively pulled his legs together, obviously remembering what happened the last time he came after me. Instead of doing anything, he grabbed my mum by the arm and dragged her away. As they were leaving the hallway, he shouted that I owed them the money they had to pay for the child abandonment fine because, according to him, everything was my fault. I told both of them to get lost because I did not owe them a single thing. Neither of them answered after that. Not long afterward, I got some really bad news. My mom had been about 7 months pregnant, and she lost the baby after falling at home. She slipped on the wet porch steps and landed face first in the gravel. Honestly, I had no idea she was even pregnant the last time I saw her. She has always been a little heavy and pretty clumsy, but not overweight, just enough that you could not really tell whether she was pregnant or not. It was a sad situation, especially because it was her first miscarriage. She desperately wanted someone to blame, and in her mind, that person was me. She believed I had ruined the family because I refused to help them anymore, and because I had supposedly cost them so much money. A while later, she and my dad came back to my apartment. This time she was on crutches, and they came only to tell me that losing the baby was my fault because I refused to move back home and help them when they needed me. That turned into another huge argument. I told them they were only looking for free childcare and were trying to blame me for something that had absolutely nothing to do with me. It was not my fault they decided to have another baby when my mum was 45 years old, and it certainly was not my fault that she fell. If they wanted to blame something, they should blame the old porch that my dad had always been too cheap to repair or replace. The moment I said that, my dad put his hands on me again. He landed a hard right hook, and after that I fought back. I had never stopped going to the gym, and by then I was even stronger than I had been the previous Thanksgiving. He never had a chance. I completely lost my temper, and before I realized it, I had broken his nose and knocked out both of his front teeth. The only reason I stopped was because my mom was screaming. Someone called the police, and when they arrived, they put me in handcuffs while my dad was taken away in an ambulance. Fortunately, the hallways in my apartment building were covered by security cameras, and I had also started recording with my phone from inside my apartment as soon as my parents knocked on the door. The video clearly showed that my dad attacked me first and that I was defending myself. In the end, everything was ruled self-defense, so I was cleared. Even so, my parents started talking about suing me to recover my dad's medical bills and the fine they had paid earlier. Dad could not work for a while because of the injuries he suffered. He ended up with a broken nose, a black eye, 2 missing front teeth, a neck brace, and probably a few more injuries I never heard about. His beard even had to be shaved off during treatment, and apparently he was especially upset about that. To be honest, he had already been dead to me long before any of this happened, and now I felt like there was nothing left between us at all. Whatever authority he thought he still had over me, as my father was completely gone. Physically, I was much stronger than he was now, and before long I would be starting a new job that paid far better because of all the work I had put in over the previous months. With a few years of saving, I figured I might finally be able to afford a much nicer place to live. My oldest sibling called me afterward and said I was their hero for standing up to Dad. They also told me they planned to leave home just like I had as soon as they turned 19. It turned out that the sibling right below them was the one who had found my Reddit posts after hearing them mentioned in a YouTube video. That was how my parents eventually discovered everything because my mom overheard them talking about it and demanded they show her the posts. According to my siblings, she completely lost it and started smashing things around the house. They both apologized for letting our parents find my posts and said they never would have mentioned them if they had realized Mom was listening. They also admitted they were relieved there would not be another baby because they were already doing far too much childcare for our parents and hated every minute of it. They even confessed that at first they had blamed me for moving out. Eventually they realized that once someone becomes an adult, they deserve to live their own life and choose their own path. Right now, I still do not know if my parents will actually go through with trying to sue me, but I honestly think they would lose if they did. One of my friend's uncles is a lawyer, and he already told me he would represent me if it came to that. He also said my parents really do not have much of a case since everything was ruled self-defense. If my parents end up reading this, I only have one thing left to say. Leave me the heck alone. You do not own me, and you do not own my siblings either. When each of them turns 19 and is able to leave, I will help them get out of your house just like I did. The two of you have always been selfish narcissists. It is not my fault Mum lost the baby, and it is not my fault you struggled after losing your free babysitter. Hopefully that broken nose and those missing teeth are enough to remind you never to lay a hand on me again. And remember, everything I have written here is only a small part of everything you put me through growing up. If I really wanted to, I could write story after story about everything that happened during my childhood, but doing that would not make me feel any better. At this point, I just want my parents to leave me alone. One more thing I did not mention before is that my mum actually had to deliver a stillborn baby at the hospital. My siblings told me she came home with a small urn that she now keeps in her bedroom, and my parents held a private funeral with just the two of them. They left the house with the urn for a few hours and came back drunk afterward. I asked my siblings for more details, and they told me my mum had stayed in the hospital for almost 6 days because of the injuries she suffered from the fall. Some people asked whether she might have been pushed. After hearing that, I started wondering the same thing myself. The only explanation I could get was that she slipped while rushing out of the house, fell off the porch, and landed hard. I have heard of people getting hurt in even stranger ways, so it seemed possible. I also looked up how long cremation usually takes, and everything I found said it normally takes between 8 and 12 days before the ashes are returned. That confused me because my mum had only been in the hospital for about 6 days. At first I thought the urn they brought home must have been empty. Then I remembered that their little funeral happened several days after my mum was discharged, and they had kept the urn in their bedroom until then. Maybe they had received the ashes by that point. It would also explain why they came home drunk afterward. Honestly, the whole situation was so strange and twisted that the more I thought about it, the more confused I became. A short time later, I had another update. It felt strange posting again so soon. In my previous update, I mentioned that my mum had lost the baby after falling during her pregnancy. After reading all the comments, something about the story still did not sit right with me. I decided the only way I was going to get the truth was by asking my parents directly. So, on Sunday, I went to their house. They were both home, and neither of them looked good. My mom still needed crutches to walk more than a few steps, and she looked completely exhausted. Even from the doorway I could see bruises, cuts, and bandages covering much of her face from the fall. As for my dad, he looked exactly the way you would expect after what happened between us in my last update. Both of them looked completely shocked when I walked in. I immediately asked whether there had really been a baby, or if the whole thing had just been another attempt to guilt me into moving back home. My dad snapped that I had a lot of nerve showing up after everything that had happened, but before he could say much more, my mum broke down crying. She insisted she really had been pregnant. Then she slowly walked into the bedroom and came back carrying a small but decorative urn. There were ashes inside it. I even looked closely and checked whether they smelled like cigarette ashes, or ashes from a barbecue, but they did not. In fact, they barely had any smell at all. I asked why they had claimed the ashes were already in the urn when they first brought it home. I told them I had looked it up, and everything said cremation usually took at least 8 to 12 days, while my mum had only been hospitalized for 6. My mum explained that they had ordered the urn ahead of time because they planned to bring the baby's ashes home as soon as the crematorium released them. She said they were heartbroken when they learned they could not take the baby home right away. According to her, they waited until the ashes were ready a few days later, picked them up, and afterward went out drinking. She also claimed the crematorium had finished everything a little sooner because she begged them to hurry. As she explained it, there were real tears in her eyes. I had seen my mom fake crying plenty of times before, but this looked different. It did not seem forced. She gave me more details about what happened the day she fell. She told me she had overslept after taking a nap and ended up running late for an appointment with her doctor and obstetrician. While hurrying out of the house, she stepped on one of the kids' toys as she was going down the porch steps. The porch railing had rotted away and broken several years earlier, and my dad had never repaired or replaced it. Because there was nothing for her to grab onto, she lost her balance and fell off the porch, landing face first and stomach first on the ground. She even showed me the bruises and marks that were still covering her stomach where she had landed. Then she quietly told me the baby had been another boy. I already have 2 brothers and 2 sisters, so that would have made 1 more little brother. She also told me the doctors warned her never to try getting pregnant again because, after everything that had happened, her body might not survive another pregnancy due to her age and the injuries she had suffered. I had already suspected that after reading what people sent me, but hearing it directly from her still hit differently. Finally, I asked the question that had been bothering me the most. If all of this was true, then why had she blamed me? My mom started trying to explain that the day they came to my apartment had been an especially terrible day, and that she had not been thinking clearly. Before she could finish, my dad suddenly interrupted her. He looked straight at me, raised his voice, and shouted that it was all my fault.